From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Unconquered with Doc Staples, bringing you the Hot Takes podcast after Florida State goes down to Clemson. I'm recording right now, late fourth quarter, just after Florida State failed to get a first down on the second, what looks like it's going to be their second to last drive. It's 24-10, so I don't know if this is the final score, but my guess is it's going to be what the final score is. Just need, essentially Clemson needs to close this out, and they're in good position to do so. Punt this ball away and move on from where they are now. So as always, this podcast is brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price, and by Luis Marquez and there you have the deflected interception. I tell you what, Florida State really just finds ways. It's just unbelievable. Wow. So back to it. By Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida. By Shenandoah Newsma of shenrealestate.com in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, and by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. And I'm telling y'all, this wasn't a surprising outcome. I mean, this is well within the delta of everything we talked about. That, one team could easily win by 20. The other team could easily win by 20. It was just a matter of which team would ultimately decide to shoot itself in the foot more frequently in this game. And Florida State jumps to the line ahead of Clemson now through the head-to-head win here for the team that is best this season at putting bullets in its own feet or own body just in general. Florida State likes to find all sorts of ways to do this. And, at a certain point, it becomes funny. It's really, it's borderline insane how bad Florida State has been all season situationally. It is unreal how this team has been able to find ways to hurt itself when it's playing well on a down-to-down basis, and then they just find ways. In this game, these two teams were basically even across the board. Florida State, I'm looking at the numbers right now with just a little bit of time left as Clemson's about to kneel this out. Florida State, right now, 313 yards to Clemson's 320. 4.2 yards per rush for Florida State, 2.8 for Clemson. Clemson with a little bit more, 221 net passing yards to 203. Total plays, 64-61. Florida State averaging 4.9 yards per play, Clemson 5.2. You would expect that game to go down to the absolute wire, to be maybe a field goal, maybe go to overtime. Florida State lost by 14. They found ways. And that's just what they've done all season. And you might say, well, a lot of that was in the second half. First half numbers were very similar. 66 rush yards to 73 for Clemson. Clemson a little bit more in the passing game in the first half. Overall, just a little bit more success, but not by a bunch. But here's the difference. Florida State gets the ball down inside the 10-yard line, and they fumble. They fumble in exchange on a zone read. There you go. That's one touchdown, potentially. FSU schemes up a wheel route where they've got one of their fastest players going straight up the sideline with nobody near him. Goes right through his hands. Quarterback throws a little behind him, goes right through his hands. Even if he'd caught that and turned around, he's still in position to potentially score on that play. Instead, you get nothing. You go for it on fourth down, and you roll the dice. And I know some people are going to say, you should never go for it early in the game from your own 40. That should never happen. That was a terrible coaching mistake. Guys, if it's 4th and 1 in that situation, and you're in a game where you're playing to win instead of just to keep it close, possession of the ball matters a lot. And if you're a running football team in general, and you've been successful in short yardage most of the season, That's a good call. And then if you have something in your back pocket where you're like, we think we can get one and maybe sneak one out for a long touchdown on this, it makes a lot of sense. And you schemed it up perfectly. You have a throw down the sideline to a guy on a wheel route, a guy that's going to be playing in the NFL, who's likely to make an NFL roster. Quarterback puts it on the money. He walks in the end zone if he makes that catch from 60 yards out. Walks in. And he drops the ball. That's a guy who's got some of the best hands on your football team, and he just puts it on the ground. This is what Florida State has gotten so good at in recent years. Last year and this year. That's what they're so good at. And it is incredible. And, I'm going to hear a bunch of people talking about how poorly coached this team is and all this and play calling this, play calling that. This is a physical football team. This is a team where the play calling, all in all, was good on the night. Generally speaking, I think on both sides of the ball, they put their guys in position to win. The problem in terms of coaching isn't that. The problem comes down to being prepared for situations, and this team is so bad in situations. And yes, that's on the coaching staff. Yes, it's on the coaching staff to have the players who are going to succeed in those situations. Now, again, you expect Randy Pittman, of all players, to be a guy that's going to catch that and walk into the end zone, and then you've tied the ball game and game on. Everything's where you want it to be. Instead, it's 14-0, and that's ball game. That's the difference. That play is probably the biggest thing. That play changed the complete outcome of this game. If it's 7-7 after that play, this is game on. You might win the game. But as I said in the preview, whichever team comes out of the first quarter ahead is probably going to be the team that wins, because neither of these teams is really equipped to come back from behind, and both quarterbacks have struggled in that situation a good bit this year, and that's what we saw. It is uncanny, though, how bad this team is situationally. And how many ways they found to shoot themselves in the foot. You get a big play on a 3rd and 1, and you get a hands to the face that makes it 3rd and 16, and you punt. You get down into the red zone again, and you have a wide receiver who, again, situationally, the small details, the little details, situationally screws it up. What does he do? Gets called for offensive pass interference. And then after that, so instead of having a big play down into the inside the 5-yard line, now you're again, 2nd or 3rd and 20? Was it 2nd and 20, I think? And then the same player who's still out there goes out and gets into a swinging match with the DB. They're locked up, and they both take swings at each other's head, and somehow only one of them gets called for a penalty. And I will say, I think this was a poorly officiated game. I do think, by and large, the calls went more against Florida State in this game. There were a couple places where I think Clemson could have gotten a little bit of a break, but geez, I mean, at a certain point, when you got two guys that are swinging at each other and each makes contact with the other's helmet, at what point, how do you call that on one guy and not the other? I don't. And how does another official not come in and go, they both swung? Does the ACC not know that both Clemson and Florida State sued the conference? Do they not realize that? I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that, but I can tell you right now, this is the sort of thing that after this game, I think, again, the odds that Mike Norvell survives are well under 50% at this point. And I think you look at his body language on the sideline, he's blinking a lot, and you see him, he knew how important this game was to surviving. I think this more than likely is it for Mike Norvell. But we'll see. I mean, what happens if you go through and you dominate the rest of your schedule and you beat Florida at the end of the year? I don't know. But I don't, at this point, I'm not sure that would be enough. And I know a lot of my listeners, a lot of you out there, think it shouldn't be enough. I'm more willing to say, given how hard this team played again, that they've not quit, I'm more willing to say, uh, look at this coaching market. And I think, you swallow that $75 million to fire your head coach and buy out those assistants, and you're about as likely to wind up in a hole as you're in now. I'm not sure that this is the right decision. I know a bunch of people are, going to very much disagree with me on this, but I don't think it really matters because, again, I think even if Florida State wins out from here, I think it's unlikely that we'll see FSU retain Norvell. And, it's too bad because I definitely was rooting for him. I still am rooting for him. I think he is a good coach. I think he's a good man. I think things have gone very poorly in the last couple of years. And I don't think that this team is especially well coached in some of the details. And I talked about this last week. I was asked, what is it about Curt Cignetti that makes it so that his teams win even when they don't have elite talent across the board? And look, they do have more talent than people think. They just weren't, super highly rated. Some of it is evaluation, some of that. But the biggest thing is absolute obsessive attention to detail in every area. And I do feel like this is one of those places where Florida State, and Mike Norvell does say this all the time, how you do one thing is how you do everything. But I do think that there's a certain amount that is allowed to slide in terms of accountability, that certain details are allowed to slide just enough that when pressure gets high, when you end up in situations where you really need execution, what happens? Well, that's when it gets difficult. That's when you when the habits that you've built, when the little details come out. And I mean, I'll be totally honest about this. I mean, when Norvell first took over, one of the things I was very happy about is that they reinstituted the equivalent of mat drills. Now, with some tweaks and everything, but old school mat drill type stuff. But when I watched him, and yes, I did get a chance to watch those sessions remotely, I'll say. When I watched him, I was discouraged a little bit because ultimately there were things that essentially I had to go back for. My teammates, when I was playing, we had to go back for and were drummed out of us in terms of, guy doesn't run the last half yard through the line at full speed. Guys, across an entire wave drill, their knees aren't bent enough. There a little mistake here, a little mistake there. Those little pieces of attention to detail. And I sent this to a couple of my old teammates, to BMAC and a few guys at the time, saying, what do you see? And I got the same of like, oh man, like they're letting that happen. They're letting that slide. And so, that was the one thing that, I've never really liked in terms of this is, and I do think that when you're talking about the stuff that comes out, the old saying is that pressure reveals who you are. Pressure exposes habits. And when you consistently struggle under pressure in some of these moments, when when something goes wrong, it's like when you're a golfer and you find a way to and you have a bad habit. You can be working on it for a long, long time, but when you're really under pressure, that's when that swing flaw is going to come back out. This is the sort of thing I'm talking about with Florida State. When little things are not drummed out of you in every rep in practice, that's when that stuff comes out. And ultimately, I think that's been the difference this season as much as anything, because this team is really close. I mean, this team is really, really close to being a one-loss team still at this point in the season, and they have 5. That's how close this team is. But close isn't good enough at Florida State. Let's be honest about that. It's just not. And that's ultimately why we're probably going to see what we're going to see after the season. Again, is it possible to get some things turned around sufficiently to keep things in order? Maybe. But, even if that happens, I do think that that's the one thing that has to be addressed, that has to be, handled and fixed. Otherwise, I think you still wind up with some of these same problems. So yeah, it's wild. And of course, Virginia is about to get beat, it looks like. Chandler Morris got hurt against Wake Forest. So the Virginia team, and again, this shows how close Florida State is and how maddening this all is. Virginia, the very team that beat Florida State, the first loss that Florida State took was Virginia, getting beat by the team that Florida State should have shut out last week and beat 42-7. And getting beat at Virginia. That's who this Florida State team is. Good enough to beat Alabama, bad enough to lose to Stanford. And the boundaries, the margins are really slim, and this team's really close, but they're not good enough. And they're not good enough to have big enough margins to make it work. And that's the issue. And if the margins aren't huge, the details have to be perfect, and they're not. So, I've already gone through the reasons that they lost this game. It's real simple. They were -1 in -2 in the turnover battle, really -1 in terms of the ones that mattered. The second one came, in desperation, but -1 in the turnover column. And I said in the preseason, or in the pregame, in the preview, if one of these teams goes -1 in the turnover battle, they almost certainly win this game, and they probably win by more than one score. Well, there you go. So turn it over inside the low red zone. So, inside your 10, you miss a field goal. You drop 2 wheel routes that would have either set up or in the one case been a walk-in touchdown. One of which turns into a quick score for Clemson, which, quick change defense has been awful for Florida State all season. And then you have a couple others where you wind up with the hands to the face that costs you another drive, and then a offensive pass interference and an unsportsmanlike that cost you another drive. That's where you lost the game. Those plays, and those are all just poor discipline or poor execution in key situations. The rest of the game, this team was as good as, or I think actually better than, Clemson for the remainder of the game. Final numbers, 5.2 yards per play to 5.1. And you lose by 14 points. It's what it is. Well, I won't belabor this because, I think everybody else saw what I saw. And, I'm not going to make any of you happier by talking about, what needs to change or anything else, because, until we see how this season plays out and see what changes are made, we're just kind of wasting our breath, and I have a ton to do outside of this. So I'm just going to stop here. No reason to belabor it. Thanks as always for listening. Thanks to my sponsors. Thanks to my supporters and, those who've donated and everything else. Really appreciate you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. Hot Takes edition after Florida State loses to Clemson at Clemson 24-10 in a game that was a lot closer than that statistically, but never felt in doubt. So we'll leave it there. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger, Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support. I made this.